Just you already have your checklist, which we'll take a look at here in a little bit. Remember, tomorrow you do have a quiz for chapter number 5 for Grapes of Wrath. So if you haven't started looking over that, that would be something to do today. What are you allowed to bring with you tomorrow? Your brain, and then you can bring 1 page of notes. And remember that 1 page does mean front back, but it does have to be handwritten. So no copy pasting or anything like that, typing it up. And again, you're not required to have it. It's not an assignment or anything. It's just if you feel better having it, you can have it with you. I'll give you about 10 minutes to go over that quiz, and then when you're done, we'll basically pick up wherever we end up leaving off today. Your rough draft for your essay for the Grapes of Wrath, which we'll start talking about today, that's going to be Wednesday of next week, and that's when that little sheet of paper comes in. Mine looks a little bit different up here, but basically says the same thing. Next Wednesday, I'm going to check it in. It is going to be worth grand total of 15 points, as you see down there at the bottom. It's not going to be an essay grade. It's just going to be participation, like a homework check. So on Wednesday of next week, I'm not giving you 15 points and going, hey, that means it's going to be an A paper or a B+, nor does 7 out of 15 mean it's going to be poor, but this is just making sure that you have all those requirements taken care of. Wednesday, when you come in, and you'll have your papers with you, a paper copy. You can see me in homeroom if you need to print them out, because we're going to do some peer editing. You're going to move around, get into some small groups, check with each other, and then I'll come around group to group to get some feedback and help out as needed. So as long as your essay is typed, Times New Roman, double spaced, you'll get those 2 points. As long as you have your 5 paragraphs, intro, conclusion, 3 body paragraphs, you have those 5 points. This does not mean every essay we do is 5 paragraphs. It's not necessarily cookie cutter, but for this one, I want you to make sure you have at least those 3 body paragraphs. The ones down here, these 2 are the ones that you're going to have to pay the most attention to for your rough draft and then also your final copy. Each of those body paragraphs has to have at least 3 specific cited examples in your paragraph. So each of the body paragraphs will have 3 examples coming straight from the text. Of those 3 examples, 2 of them need to be at least quoted passages. So you would have quotes, quotations, passages. That doesn't have to be dialogue. It can still be, description, narration taking place. But you would have 2 things that are quoted in each paragraph, and then your 3rd example, wherever you put it, maybe the 1st, the 2nd, or the 3rd one, will be a specific example that you reference. If Jack's worried about, I don't know if this is specific enough, and he wants to quote 3 examples to make sure you cover all your bases, I'm perfectly fine with that. That's up to you. But each paragraph, each body paragraph will have at least 3 specific examples. Quick math, how many examples then you're going to have throughout the whole essay? You guys are better than the first period. It took them an extra half second. Your examples coming from the book are going to be fairly equal so far as the expository chapters. Expository meaning like the little mini essays like chapter 5 that you are rereading, the Turtle chapter. So the non-Jode chapters and the narrative chapters, which would be the Jode. So not everything is going to be Jode examples, not everything is going to be the expository examples. Matt, any concerns about having equal support for 9 examples? Okay, well that's okay. Some people might go, how do I have equal support if it's a odd number? Luke could have 4 expository and 5 narrative. You could have 5 expository, 4 narrative. Does not matter. They're fairly equal though. If you had 3 expository and 6 narrative, now you're getting a little unbalanced there. And then the last thing would be for your 2 points that you have a works cited page. Everybody will have the Grapes of Wrath as a works cited, and then you might have some additional things that you use, for attention grabbers, or if you used anything else to kind of help develop your argument, you would cite those things as well. So this is not assessing the content, the quality of the content, but this is making sure at least those main parts are there. Then we'll work on it for the next couple weeks to make sure everything is the way that it needs to be. Does that make sense? Anybody got any questions, concerns for it? So rough draft 1 that we're doing for next Wednesday, and then the second one that we're going to do for the following week, they're both going to follow this. So you'll have 30 points of rough draft before you turn in final copies of essays. Getting nods for the most part. Okay. If you signed up for the turn it in, or not turn it in, I keep saying turn it in, the Remind app yesterday, you got a little note from me basically going thank you. I also then sent you a link, and if you didn't sign up for the Remind app, that's okay because you still have access to the link. I have the web address on your weekly syllabus that you get, but it was a tiny URL, Mr. Kane, AP Lang. That takes you to class calendar, which I think I mentioned yesterday, but I didn't show it to you. Just wanted to make sure you're aware that it's here. All it is it's a Google Calendar, so it's pretty easy to follow along. But any resources that I give to you, or the majority of resources I give to you, I also post on here. So not that your weekly syllabus is absolutely critical at this point, but let's say you needed your weekly syllabus and you lost it, or you don't know what happens to it. You would be able to click on the event, you go to more details, and then there would be a link to the actual document itself. Right there, and then it will pop up. This might become a little bit more useful for a homework assignment if you have it, or I might give you a reading. It's not in your Bedford Reader, but I give it to you as a paper copy. A digital copy of it would be available on here. The other thing, and I could see this being an issue for today, when we tend to talk about things in class, everyone nods their head, it makes sense, and then you walk out that door and you completely forget what we talked about, or it doesn't make as much sense. A lot of days I'll have YouTube notes available for you, where if you go to, when you click on that event, you'll see under description it says class recording. If you click on that link, it will then take you to YouTube, and you can relive all the excitement that we had throughout the day. You're getting excited. I could be in your ear all day long. You can listen to things that Luke says that don't make sense.
Every week, you get one of these things from me, which...
If I'm feeling lazy, I record first period and then just play it all day long. I don't do that. You kind of like that idea? No? Okay. So calendar is on here. Again, not something that you absolutely have to use, but Ray goes, I missed the last couple days. What do we do? My first question will probably be, did you check out the class calendar? If he goes, no, you should probably check out the calendar. If he goes, yes, I had a question about the description we were doing with Chapter 5, then we're ready to help him and whatnot. Okay? So let's take a look at prompt, Grapes of Wrath, you have in your course syllabus. And you're excited, I can tell. So what do you have to do? You can't reread the prompt, that's cheating. Let's put it this way. How many decisions do you need to make in regards to answering number 1? And we're only worried about number 1. Number 2 is, as far as we're concerned, not there right now. Well, what decisions do you need to make for this prompt in order to be able to answer it? Would be 1. Okay, you're going to have to decide what rhetorical devices do you want to use. You know how many do you have to use? You know you have to use 3. You might be starting to figure out, I need 3 devices. I have 3 body paragraphs, so each body paragraph will be a specific rhetorical device. I would say, even though that's the first thing that shows up in the prompt, this will probably be, or should be, decision number 2 for you. Still a very critical decision, but it's going to be like the second one. Well, I think the first one is that we need to do. All right, the first thing that we're going to figure out, or try to figure out, is what is Steinbeck's attitude toward the effect or effects of the Dust Bowl on the migrant people. That is the first one. A lot of times people initially, early on at the beginning of the year, will flip-flop these. Hey, I'm going to decide which devices I want to use. Then I'll find the argument that works for those. That usually does not work nearly as well. A lot of times you need to work backwards with this one. I did give you a little bit of leeway to do some things where I mentioned effect or effects. You could do multiple effects if you want. I think it's probably in your best interest to choose 1 because it keeps everything a little bit more narrow, focused, cohesive. If you try doing too much, you could really give yourself a headache, before you get very far. So how do we feel about deciding or selecting what Steinbeck's attitude is toward the effect or effects of the Dust Bowl? there one on the tip of your tongue?
His attitude?
Yeah.
He's bitter, kind of.
All right, I like that word. For being put on the spot, that was a good response. What's the least favorite question of students when like a teacher asks? Because I ask this one all the time. Why? Or what's he bitter about?
He's bitter about the way they're being treated and how they're kind of helpless to change anything.
Okay. And you mean like the migrant people? Okay. And you can say yes, no, or I'm not sure. Would you say there's anyone he's most bitter toward, since a lot of people do mistreat the migrants?
I know that there was a lot of blame placed on Hoover at the time, but I'm not sure if that was his.
Okay. So like, but government, I mean, all right. You don't have to do it, but that could work. So we would then, and we're getting ahead of ourselves, but select rhetorical devices that illustrate why Steinbeck feels bitter about the treatment of the migrants at the hands of the government. That would be something that you could do. Make no mistake, there's not one right answer that I'm looking for, one specific argument. It gets really boring very quickly to read 70 essays about the same thing over and over and over again. I want there to be multiple ideas out there that people select. Certainly some folks might get geared towards a certain realm, and depending upon your interest, you might focus on certain things. So those who have a natural inclination towards politics, you might look at the government treatment, of the migrant people. But by no means does that mean you have to go in that direction. So that's a good one. What would be some other ideas about Steinbeck's overall attitude about the effect or effects decibel on the migrant people? Matt's in that deep place right now. It's a place called Dumb Call. Pitiful? Okay. About?
He always tries to point out like how poor they are and how not well off, like how they don't have any food.
So like the overall living conditions? Okay.
They're treated so unfairly by others, like the police officers and
Okay, unfair treatment, the police, deputies, overall living conditions are rather squalid in some places. I mean, chapter 5, you're looking at their living conditions. Boom, house gets taken out, gone. Later on, they're in like the Hoover camps. You mentioned the Hoovervilles, mentioning President Hoover. Those conditions aren't necessarily all that good from time to time. Living on the side of the road, making tents, just trying to get by. You find a place where you can stay and someone's going to charge you $5 to live on their property for a night. So those conditions certainly are not good. The idea about trying to get running water, cost of food, can you actually get food, working conditions, all of those things would certainly be up for grabs. And pitiful certainly would probably be a pretty accurate description about how he feels towards it, because they are certainly not all that good whatsoever. One interesting thing took place when you look at the two examples that we have so far. Can anyone think of a term that would unite government and police? Like a more generic term. Still a good term, but anything that would be like an umbrella term that those two things would therefore fall under. Like government, police. Yeah, the types of authority, is that going to be a similar response? The nice thing, and not saying that you could not mention government or go with police, what happens if you were to go Steinbeck possesses bitter feelings towards the treatment of the migrants at the hands of authority? By me using the term authority, that gives me the possibility to include government. That gives me the possibility to include police. That also gives me the possibility of including what else? Shows up in chapter 5 a lot. Could be the landowners, because the tenants are the migrant people. The landowners, it's not my fault.
Yeah.
Whose fault is it? It's the bank, it's the monster. So you could then bring in landowners, you could bring in the bank. If you were to use the idea that the police treat the migrant people unfairly, I have no problem with it whatsoever. But if you mention early on in your introduction that it's the police who are treating the migrants unfairly, all of your body paragraphs have to be about the police treating the migrants unfairly. If you were to go that the authority figures treat the migrant people unfairly, now what does that give you the capability of doing? I could have a government paragraph, I could have a police paragraph, I could have a landowner, bank, big business kind of paragraph. Makes no difference to me which way you go. I'm not saying one's better than the other, but sometimes folks like to have flexibility, and so a term like authority gives you that flexibility to go into multiple directions with it. The police idea would be fine. How many cited examples do you have to have within your whole essay? You did the math for us earlier. It's 9, so you need 9 police examples. You might find it easier to get 9 authority examples as opposed to putting all your eggs in that one basket. But the call is, completely yours. What else? Like other possible arguments? Again, we're brainstorming. We're throwing up ideas. I'm not going, yes, you will write that one.
With anger towards the
Okay. Again, if you like government economics, this could go right into your wheelhouse. If you don't like those things, I would stay away. What's the opposite going to be then of capitalism? Like generally, if you're going to go against capitalism, what do you tend to endorse more often than not? Tends to be socialism. There is a chapter, I think it's chapter 14. Steinbeck calls attention to 2 pronouns and talks about a shift is occurring, going from one pronoun to the other. It's going from the I to the we. What does capitalism focus on? I. What does socialism focus on? Community, we. So there certainly are some endorsements that would be taking place. In that same chapter, he makes some allusions to people. He calls out Jefferson, but he also calls out Thomas Paine, Karl Marx, Lenin. You certainly will have some readers in 1939 United States going, why are you calling out Russian revolutionaries? And not necessarily liking that so much with Lenin, or having Marx get mentioned because that could have a negative connotation to some people. So, yeah, there certainly is some socialistic, some folks would go propaganda, others would go intellectual ideas, being spread throughout the course of the book. So that is something that you could definitely take a look at. I could see that being in some folks' wheelhouse. I could see others going, I don't want to go anywhere near it. Make sure you go with the argument that would best suit you. Any positives? I mean, not that the whole book is meant to be uplifting, because it's not. And that ending is really weird. Nobody wants to talk about. But are there any positives to take away from it?
He seems kind of hopeful that the Joes will eventually find work. And they keep going on and on. There's no work here, so we'll just keep going to look for more.
Yeah. And it's certainly not just the Jodes, but it'd be everyone. I mean, one of the common questions that comes up, why is it like a description chapter, expository, and then it's about Jodes, and then description, and then about Jodes, and then description, and then about Jodes, and so on and so on and so forth. What does that do? Because most of the Jode chapters match up with what's going on in the descriptive chapters.
I felt like it kind of should have been what they were going through, was kind of like universal for
Yeah, I mean Lexi's absolutely right. You have the used car salesman chapter, and then the Jodes buy a car. And then you have the we need to sell all our stuff chapter, and then the Jodes have to sell all their stuff. So the story that's taking place, it's not just about one family with the Jodes. I think you said universal is more of a word. This kind of illustrates that the issues that they're going through is universal. So that could therefore mean it's not just hopeful that the Jodes will find work or find, I don't know if happiness is going to be the right word, but find some kind of success. But what could happen? All people, there's the potential for it to occur. Now, you don't really get that, at the end of the story. You get Rosa Sharon breastfeeding a dying man. Sorry, we're Jodes, Rosa Sharon. Before that scene, how would you describe Rosa Sharon other than pregnant? Selfish, bratty, egotistical, waste of oxygen. What does she do at the end? I mean, and her mental state is probably not going to be very good. Just had a stillbirth take place, but what does she do? She's in a position to help someone, and she does it in a way that certainly the reader is not expecting, but it is certainly in a very vulnerable kind of way. If Rose of Sharon, of all people, can actually help a person, then what does that say about the rest of us? Maybe we actually could do it too. So it could be a struggle, not in the manner that she does it. It may be a struggle, but there certainly is a sense of hope that something good could ultimately come out of this. Now, if you were to go that route, that doesn't mean you're saying this is a happy fairy tale book, but you're still looking at what are some of the effects. People come together. People are able to put others' needs in front of their own. That certainly could be an effect, or multiple effects of the gospel. Right? You don't have to certainly at this point know what your idea is ultimately going to be, but my hope is that at this point you start to see some of the possibilities that could exist. So you have bitter, pitiful, anger, hopeful ideas. Does all of those things make sense so far as the types of arguments that you can start to come up with? I mean, we could make a list of probably a dozen of these things. So you're not regulated to just those, limited to those, but that kind of gives you an idea in which you could go. Sound good? Okay. So we got to pick an argument, and then we have to pick rhetorical devices. Lexi, this is the fun part. All right, on a clean sheet of paper, we're going to go vertical here. You're going to write a fun word. Diddles. Give yourself a little bit of space in between each letter. If you ever need paper, it's also behind Jack in case you don't have your handy dandy notebook with you. Ben, did you ever say diddles before? You should say it. You'll feel better. It's good. Ryan, did you ever say diddles? Or Ray, ever say diddles?
No.
Hey, I got like 3 letters right. I just have them in the wrong order.
True.
Never said. You just did.
Yeah.
It's a good time.
Felt good.
It does. We tend to remember silly things, so we're going with a silly one here with diddles. Any idea what it stands for? I bet you can start to figure it out. There you go. All right, so it's a mnemonic device. It's diction, imagery, details. Didfist doesn't sound right, so the L is figurative language, and then the S is syntax. If you're not making the connection, those are the devices that got listed in the prompt that you could certainly use. These are training wheels. Diddles is a way for you to remember what some rhetorical devices would be. Ray's never said it before, but he's going to say it, at least in his head, many times throughout the course of the year. Anytime you have a rhetorical analysis prompt, which is what you have with this one, and it's not hard to figure out why this would be called rhetorical analysis, because what 2 words do you see? You got rhetorical and analyze. You see those two words, it's a good chance you're doing rhetorical analysis. Chances are you're going to have to look for rhetorical devices. So the basic ones, not meaning poor, but especially at the beginning of the year, the solid ones to use are diction, imagery, details, figurative language, and syntax. To use those things or to be able to recognize them, you certainly have to know what they mean. So what could be some definitions or ideas for diction? Like what do we mean by an author's diction? I mean their word choice. And with diction, we mean specific, individual words. You don't really want to simply go, Steinbeck uses diction throughout his novel. Because basically, what are you saying or writing? He uses words. No kidding. We're aware of that. But you would be finding specific individual words that fit into a certain category that really help get his point across. Helena, was it bitter was the word that you used when first describing his argument? You could certainly argue that he uses bitter diction. And then you would find specific individual words that demonstrate that resentment that he has. We might not know what they are off the top of our head, but you'd be finding words that would support that. As you read chapter 5, you want to take note to what are some specific individual words that pack a little bit more punch, power behind them than just what a regular standard word could be. For Friday, when you're reading I Have a Dream, Martin Luther King, he uses a ton of various types of diction to get his point across. The migrant people, Californians refer to them as the Okies. Okie used to mean you was from Oklahoma, now it means you're, anyone remember the word? Scum, dirt. Okay, that's diction. That use of scum, that has a strong negative connotation to it. A lot of times the Okies, the migrants, get compared to animals. So there'll be references to them as dogs, gorillas, things like that. So that diction, that specific word choice is getting a certain emotion or idea across. You would not go, the diction in this passage is powerful, but you would identify the specific individual words that have that power behind them. So if you do diction, make sure that you're going to focus on particular words, not just a whole sentence. And we'll go into some examples with this as we move on. If you're using imagery, what are you appealing to? Appeal to your senses. Now, generally, I think we probably focus on visual imagery, because that tends to happen most within books, but it certainly could be other senses as well. So appeals to senses. Any examples of imagery come to anyone's mind throughout the course of the book? You don't have to quote it. I'm not.
When you talk about like the rain during the storm, just that scene in general.
The environment in general. Steinbeck almost always has the environment kind of become a character. He does it in The Pearl, and we will never mention that book again. And he does it in a lot of the other texts, that he writes. Luke, you were saved. You can thank me later. But the description of the dirt, the ground, the wind, the dust, all that stuff, just in chapter number 1 is a big deal. The description of the land, what's happening to it in chapter 5 as the tractors are coming through. You have descriptions of the migrants being, and now you're getting into figurative language, but it's like a swarm of insects, great ants moving along. So there does tend to be a lot of imagery taking place, especially when environment comes into play. And it goes in other places as well. But imagery is going to be appealing to the senses. Now, certainly there can be a little bit of crossover between diction and imagery, but these are going to be appealing to senses. This, you're looking at a specific word. Scum doesn't necessarily appeal to a sense the same way that description of the rain very well could, or some other scenes that would take place. Generally with imagery, when negative things happen, the dog, you get some imagery description taking place, when they realize what has happened. Route 66 in itself, there's a lot of description, imagery taking place with that. Details. Anyone want to take a guess without using the word details? Specific examples. Details you're going to find more so probably in nonfiction things, like especially speeches and whatnot. Details you're probably not going to use a lot. It doesn't mean you cannot use it for this book, because it certainly does show up within it. But for the most part, when details get mentioned, you're looking more at statistics, numbers, and basically repeating the same thing over and over. Data. Those are the kinds of details that we would be taking a look at. And you do get a fair amount of statistics. Number of handbills that are in circulation, wages, number of people who are going for those jobs, what the number of jobs actually are, costs of things, comparison of costs versus wages. Anyone remember how much money the tractor driver gets in Chapter 5? Joe Davis's boy, Rose, gets $3 a day. And then you find out what you can get with those $3, buying new shoes and things like that. But you get a little extra money if you happen to knock over a house, even though people don't want you to. So those would be some of the statistics, the numbers, the type of data that can start to come through. Figurative language is going to come to, because syntax is the one that sometimes I think people struggle with a little bit more. Anyone want to try to give a definition of syntax? Luke, vocab word last year.
Yeah, it's the order of the words in the sentence.
You got it. Sentence structure. So this could be the arrangement of words, which could include repetition. It can also be sentence length. Any chapters where you recall the voice just sounding different, the tone? And besides going all of them?
I don't remember the chapter it was, but like when they were doing like the used car things, they were really short and they sounded like ads.
It's chapter 7, and yeah, the syntax of that chapter completely changes. You do get a lot of short, quick, punchy sentences. When a person is speaking really fast, and there's also a lack of punctuation within that chapter, so punctuation could be an issue. By there not being much punctuation, how do you read those sentences? Much more quickly. How is a migrant person leaving going to feel going to the used car salesman to buy a car? Because they know that person needs a car. So what are they going to try to do with the family? Make sure they buy a car. So they're feeling stressful, very anxious, and the sentences kind of mimic that feeling that those people would have. Quick, punchy, quick sentences. That's basically the way that a person's mind is going to be going. This one probably, so far as syntax, takes a little while for people to feel comfortable with. You will get more comfortable with it as we go along if you're not there yet. I can't really tell you why, probably because we just keep talking about it so much, but there is a point where it kind of makes sense a little bit. You're not being pressured to pick any one particular one of these devices because you need 3, and so far, how many have we covered? 4, so you could leave one out. But then there's figurative language. Here's the nice thing about figurative language. It's a really big category. What's the first example of figurative language you probably learned in like 3rd grade? Simile. And then since you learned simile, your teacher also had to teach you metaphor. And then they went into detail about specific metaphors and mentioned personification. And then you learned about irony, hyperbole, allusion, symbolism, and we could keep going and going and going and going. You will not select, listen carefully, you will not select figurative language as a rhetorical device. Rose, you'll be in trouble if you do. But what can you select? Any one of these things or other types of figurative language that exist. So Jack could decide that he is going to take a look at imagery. He's feeling brave and he's going to do syntax, and then he's going to do irony. Okay. Okay? The problem is selecting figurative language is too general, too broad. It's too wide open, so you do need to narrow down your type of figurative language. So you can select a type that you want. What other possibility does that open you up for? Because I mentioned you don't have to pick any specific one, but you're pretty good with irony. You're pretty good when it comes to similes. You're pretty good when it comes to symbolism. Those could be your 3 rhetorical devices. So they all could fit under figurative language, but these are 3 distinct things. So the ones that you ultimately choose are going to be completely up to you. You could go diction, simile, syntax, imagery, detail, syntax, simile, irony, symbolism. You pick. But you want to make sure that before you select what those devices are, you come up with what your argument is going to be. People will make the mistake where sometimes they'll go, that's a symbol, I'm going to write about it. That's a simile, I'm going to write about it. That's an example of alliteration, I'm going to write about it. But what do you need to keep all those things together? The same argument. So if you don't know that those examples support the same argument, you really have a serious problem. So pick the argument first, then you go back and find, okay, where do these things start to show up? And that's what we'll do with Chapter 5, a little bit more so tomorrow. What are some of these examples of how diction, imagery, details, figurative language, syntax work together? What sentence do you need to really get right for the whole essay to fall into place? You need your thesis statement to work. So tomorrow I'm going to show you how to put together a thesis statement based on rhetorical devices that you select and an overall argument. So we'll put some sample ones together so you know the direction, therefore, that you'd be going in. Quiz tomorrow. Yay, we earn points. It's 20. I expect you to call it before you begin. Otherwise, it doesn't count.